clay soil that's very, very unyielding. Yet they managed. Now, here, folk, be prepared for the ride. Now, what did they write? They wrote on clay tablets, and what they wrote, all right, we today call fairy tales. There are three beginnings to fairy tales. Fairy tales could begin once upon a time. You might have read these stories in elementary school. I don't know what they teach in elementary school anymore. Long ago and far away, there lived. Now there's a third beginning to the fairy tales. Back when I was in the Army. I was in the Army once. What usually follows is a fairy tale. How do fairy tales usually end? They lived happily ever after. I saw a man reading a book to his daughter one time, and he's reading, and they lived happily ever after on Social Security. I'm collecting Social Security, and that's why I'm here. Gosh, one of my sisters asked me to, when are you going to quit? I don't know. Well, anyway. All right. Now, what did they write? If you read their writings, they believed that their gods had a physical presence inside their temples, and therefore their gods required that they be fed, clothed, housed. They also believed, and this is universal among mankind, that their gods intermarried with human earth women and produced a race of giants. Everybody I teach knows this, most everybody anyway. Who was Hercules' father?
Zeus.
Zeus. Yeah, that's why Hercules was so strong. I mean, his father was Zeus. He was invincible. Later on, Alexander the Great claimed that Zeus was his father. And unlike any other general, Alexander the Great was the first to engage in it. He went into battle with his army behind him. He was at the front by himself, and he was the first to engage. Believe what you will. Now, folks, I can't actually prove that the gods once intermarried with human women, but I can prove from the records that the ancients said so. All right. Now, I've had more than one pupil say, oh, but we read Superman books and we know it's fiction. The difference between them and us, folk, they did not believe that their stories were fiction. Not only was Hercules a real character in the Greek world, but the people of Messenia believed that they were descended from him, and they traced their genealogy all the way back to him. All right, Hercules' first family, you may know, was all killed. First wife, so he married again and had a bunch of children, and their descendants became the Messenians. All right. The most famous giant story of all time, and by the way, the stories about giants are found all over the globe. The most famous giant story is the story of David and Goliath. Killed a giant who was, according to records, about 10 feet tall. Killed him with a sling. Cut off his head. Again, as in addition to giant stories, they had dragon stories. They drew pictures of their dragons. They described their dragons, and remarkably, their dragons look a whole lot like our dinosaur bones when we put our dinosaur bones together. Now, the standard view is dinosaurs all died out 65 million years ago, and man did not, and dinosaurs never met. But we're now finding dinosaur flesh that actually has hemoglobin, soft tissue with hemoglobin with red blood cells still inside it. That does not last 65 million years. I had a couple of pupils, our husband and wife team, sat in the front of the class who didn't believe me. They started doing the research and came to the conclusion that I was right. That man did encounter dragons, and fairly recently. Nobody disbelieved in dragons until about the year 1600. Up until that time, everybody believed in them. Dragon stories are found all over European folklore. One of them, a king had just won a battle and got news that a dragon was at a certain village. He went to that village. Instead of waiting for his army to engage the dragon, he went himself boldly, and the dragon swallowed him whole without even chewing him. One of England's early kings. Beowulf. You might have read in literature classes. Some of the characters in Beowulf, including Beowulf's sister married a king we know actually existed. Some of the people mentioned in Beowulf are people who actually existed. Beowulf's favorite way of killing a dragon was to break its arm. I mean, if you look at these dragons, sometimes they had small arms, big stubby legs. If you could break their arms, they bleed to death. This was the same way the Babylonians got rid of them. They'd use a tree limb that looked something like, get a tree branch, something like this, and hook this around the dragon's arm, and then give it a mighty twist. Oh, that's folklore. Every society around the globe has dragon stories. How come? Anybody want to comment? The Chinese, especially more than anyone else, and also in China, we find a whole lot of dinosaur bones. In fact, one of those Chinese zodiac signs is the dragon. Go to a Chinese restaurant where they'll show you the zodiac signs, and one of them is the dragon, which they had no doubt existed because they had seen them. All right. Now, in the case of Sumer, a lot of, well, they believed that their civilization, I mean, I just mentioned how the civilization on a land that has nothing but clay would seem impossible. All right. That their civilization was a gift bequeathed to them by the gods. That one day a fish god swam up the Tigris River. He gave them the gifts of civilization. This is what they said. Again, you can look it up. All right, this school is located in the middle of a Jewish community. City of Sumer is a city of Ur, one of Sumer's cities. Does anybody know what famous Jewish person came from Ur? Hardly anybody, any college student knows this. Abraham. Abraham, the father of the Jewish nation, founder of Judaism, ancestor of the Jews, came from Ur. He was told to leave Ur. Page 11 in your book. All right, folk. You can call this a poem if you want to. If you look it up, it's one of the most famous poems in all of history. If you look it up, your books, the website you're going to find is going to say it's an allegory. I'm going to read it to you in raw format. Ur is destroyed. Bitter is its lament. The country's blood now fills its holes like hot bronze would fill a mold. Bodies dissolve like fat dissolves in the sun. Our temple is destroyed. What about the gods? Our gods have abandoned us. Like migrating birds, they have flown off. They believed their gods had the power to fly, by the way. Smoke lies on our city like a shroud. Oh, what he is the all right, I want to remind you of something I just said earlier. In the city of Ur, there was nothing that could burn. No trees, no wood, hardly any paper, maybe their clothing, nothing else. What would cause bodies to just dissolve? When we dropped atomic bombs, that happened in August, by the way, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki and went back, they found some piles of salt here and there. They got to examine where these salt piles come from. This may sound gross, but does anybody know what the salt piles were? Yes?
Ash?
You're really, really close. Certain kind of ash. Human bodies that had been completely dissolved, and what was left was a pile of salt. After Abraham left Ur, shortly afterward the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah were dissolved, but one woman who was slow getting out turned into a mound of salt. You go to that area around the Dead Sea and you'll find a bunch of salt mounds to this day. Was the destruction of Ur the same as the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah? I had a few people ask me that. I don't know for sure. We're going to talk about this again when we come to India, because the city of Mohenjo-Daro apparently met the same kind of fate. The Sumerians seem to have, to me, to have come to an abrupt end, and they were forgotten about until the 1850s, when they suddenly started being discovered again. But they were they were the founders of civilization. They were the ones who got history started, and they were the ones who were believed to have gotten all polytheistic religions started. All right. Worship of one God, worship of many gods. All your polytheistic religions have the same pattern, whether it be Northman, Scandinavian. I mean, when I was a kid, I could read the Greek mythology and find that Greek mythology was the same as Roman mythology, which was very similar to Norse mythology, which was very similar to Egyptian mythology, which was similar to Sumerian mythology. All followed a lot of the same patterns and had the same gods with different names, and sometimes even slightly different roles. But all polytheistic religions are believed to have started from Sumer. All right. Some years ago, I mean, I'm so fascinated with the Sumerians, I did one of my first graduate papers was on the Sumerians. But I had one class, I mean, the third year I taught here, I picked the topic. All of you do a paper on the Sumerians, but one young girl, what she wrote, I'll never forget. She said, what you believe about the Sumerians will be determined by your worldview, whether you have any religious beliefs or not, whether it's philosophical or political. What you believe about the Sumerians will be dependent on your worldview. Very important. The Sumerians were the people who kick-started us and got us started, folk, and then were forgotten about and vanished through the memory of mankind for more than 2,000 years. And then now they've come back on the scene.